Runners are out there on the course, and close to 24 people. There's actually, I think, close to 90 or so runners, maybe a little bit more than that, who are running in the race this year that did not get to finish the race last year. So an emotional day for them. We wish all the runners out there on the course the best. And close to 24 people are recovering today after a car wash into an Easter service Sunday at a church in Florida yesterday. This happened at the Second Haitian Baptist Church in Fort Myers, Florida. According to several local news sources, there were about 200 people inside the building when the Lexus plowed through that wall right there, the driver telling police her brakes failed. The investigation continues. No word on charges at this time. And the South Korean president has blasted the captain of the sunken ferry and some of his crew members for, quote, incomprehensible behavior and an act of murder that cannot and should not be tolerated. The captain and other crew members now face criminal charges, and new reports reveal that Captain Jun Suk Lee was one of the first people to evacuate the vessel despite telling people to stay in their seat. Right now, there are about 80 people reported dead, and there's still about 240 people still missing at this hour. And now in South America, anti-government protesters clashing with government forces in Venezuela this weekend. Groups of mass protesters hurled rocks at the National Guard, who responded with water cannons and tear gas fire. The protesters had also set up barricades across the street to hamper efforts of the dictator Nicolas Maduro's officers to disperse the crowds. 41 people have died and hundreds more have been wounded since February, when protesters started standing up to Maduro's government. And check out this story right here. The New York Times now saying that photos link masked men in East Ukraine to Russia. The report saying, quote, suggests many of the green men, those are the folks who are supposedly inciting the violence, are indeed Russian military and intelligence forces. They're equipped with the same fashion as Russian special force troops and involved in annexing the Crimea region back in February. So more evidence there that Vladimir Putin might be involved in eastern Ukraine directly. Well, she's not our queen, but we kind of love her anyway. So today we wish a happy 88th birthday to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And to mark the day, the Queen has released this new profile pic right here, the official portrait coming from the royal family right there. She looks happy, and just like the true classic iconic figure she is, this photo is in black and white, should stand for the ages. And great to see the Queen smiling. And our top story this hour, the Bureau of Land Management is now accused of leaving a trail of wreckage following that tense standoff with a Novato rancher. The department allegedly left behind holes in water tanks, destroyed water lines and fences. And according to the friends and family of Clive and Bundy, the Bureau also hired, quote, cowboys to kill 2 prized bulls. The BLM retreated in their fight to seize Bundy's cattle after protesters showed up en masse to support the Bundy family. They say they backed down for safety reasons. The Bureau of Land Management did. So.
Well, this story, John, you put it out there, and it remains disturbing. One of the reasons I ran for Congress 2 decades ago in Arizona, the War on the West, it was called then, and we're pleased to have joining us now Barry Weller, the Vice Chairman of the Apache County Board of Supervisors out in Arizona. Barry, we thank you for your time, and before we get to the specifics of the Bundy Ranch situation, I understand you were there last weekend. Tell us, from your perspective as a local or a county official in Apache County, Arizona, what is your biggest gripe with the federal government in terms of the stewardship of the land mass in your county?
Thank you. Hello, JD, and John, I believe, is the other gentleman there. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to some people on the East Coast. But I'll start by saying we miss you, JD. We're sorry about the last election that took place, but we're still on the fight out here.
Well, we appreciate that, Barry, and I've tried to explain to folks, but you're living this daily. A county like Apache County with such little private property, not property taxes to speak of, you guys wait on something called PILT, payment in lieu of taxes. Tell me what the situation is financially and, I guess, attitudinally for the people who call Apache County, Arizona home.
Let me try to give a brief picture. Apache County is one of the largest counties physically in the nation, 11,000 square miles. We're also one of the poorest counties in the nation. 2/3 of our county is Navajo Nation. 1/3 of our county is U.S. forest, with very little private property whatsoever to do any taxing. And yes, there is such a thing as payment in lieu of taxes, which essentially is the counties and the agencies or the governments of cities and towns begging the federal government for funding because we cannot utilize our own lands. The forest The lands which are supposed to be federally managed by the federal government are presumed to be owned by the federal government at this time, and it's absolutely distressing and insidious in the way it's done. You know, JD, that the spotted owl completely devastated the forest industry out here not too many years ago in the fight in the West at that time, and that's the Endangered Species Act through the Department of Interior, which absolutely shut down every sawmill there is and put every rural employee out of work. As now we are overgrowing our forest, and everybody on the East Coast can see these massive wildfires that are taking place out here. That is only because we are not allowed to clean and thin the forest and take care of them as we have always done prior to the shutdown of the mills. It turns out that the spotted owl actually does better in a thin forest and is not doing well in the thicker forest. But we didn't get on the air to talk about that. It is just an insidious fight. Now the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is introducing the Mexican gray wolf into my county. There's more Mexican gray wolves in Apache County than any other county in Arizona, and it is not with our approval. It is we are continually trying to make him manage and present the science that is necessary to do this thing properly without devastating the ranchers now. So the ranchers are being put out of business because of the devastation and predation of the wolves on the cattle that are in this county. Not only have we lost the forest industry, now we're losing our cattle industry, and that is why I went to the Bundy Ranch.
And so you were there on the Bundy Ranch, and again, the atmosphere there, if you would put it in your own words, and then I want to come back and talk more about the historical perspective and what states like Arizona need to do to get their hands on the land. But let's go to your experience last, I guess it was a week ago, at the Bundy Ranch, and what you saw and what you drew out of that experience.
I'll try. I get a little bit emotional, but I'll do my best. I arrived because there was about a 4-hour backup on the freeway. You realize that the interstate was absolutely shut down during the event of the standoff of the horseback riders and the BLM. I was about 4 miles south of that event, watching it on live streaming until the traffic broke after the event, and then I spent the next 3 days with the Bundys, with the militia, with the Constitutional Sheriff's Association, and with the Oath Keepers, trying to ferret out and understand the truth of these issues. I sat with the Bundys and ate several meals, along with Wayne Hage Jr., who's been fighting the same battle up in central Nevada. If anybody wants to look up the Hage case, he was there. This drove him into becoming an attorney so that he could try to fight this in some legal manner. I want to say for the East Coast listeners that the Bundys and the Hages are standing on what's called their water rights, and their grazing rights were pre-existing in territorial times, long before the federal government took over and these states became states. And these water rights are mentioned in any federal law or policy act that comes thereafter, is always stated subject to pre-existing rights. So when people say they're not legally doing what they're doing, they are. They are doing what they're supposed to be doing, standing for their rights. Rights are private property rights are what people should be standing for, and not turning them over to some other issue.
And this is important to amplify. Let's amplify that again for a second. Barry Weller, Vice Chairman of the Apache County Board of Supervisors. What you're saying is the Bundy family and other families there in Nevada from territorial days had pre-existing rights and understanding a covenant with the government in terms of water rights, in terms of access to the land, and then it was only really in the last 20 years that BLM and the Forest Service, to put it diplomatically or perhaps euphemistically, became much more insistent that there needed to be cash payments to the government, and that these leases would be reviewed by modern day bureaucrats instead of standing on the precedent that existed from territorial times.
That's pretty accurate. Yes, that is well said. And it's a little more than 20 years. If you look up FLPMA, which is the Federal Lands Policy and Management Act, I think it was in the late 70s, that's when they decided that the federal government wouldn't change the policy of how they would manage lands. That policies don't change laws, and they don't change rights. And that's the battle ever since that took place. And the agencies, the federal agencies, have becoming more and more bold until they're now pulling guns on the citizens, saying, we want those rights from you so we can do what we want with them.
You know, truth be told, Barry, as a recovering member of Congress, I've been late on a couple of bills, but I've never had a collector show up with a gun and threaten my life or threaten my property. Essentially, the feds right now have gone in with deadly force to demand payment, correct?
Absolutely. That was absolutely deadly force. Well, I don't know that it's hitting the news out there, but they were killing cattle. They shot his prize bull from a helicopter through the back of the neck and killed him. Several cattle were killed as they rounded them up and pulled them into the BLM pens. It's just a devastation of force.
Now, let's talk about prospectively, because always is the case, Barry Weller, a lot of folks say, well, what is the solution to this? And maybe very briefly, you could talk about the different states and the Enabling Act and what needs to happen now for western states such as Arizona, Nevada, and the like.
I will speak to an issue that I have been involved with, which Utah is out in front of presently, and that is the transfer of public lands back to the states. I invite all of your listeners to visit American Lands Council website, and it is run and organized mostly by the legislators of Utah, but multiple western states are getting very involved in this, and we've been involved for 3 years trying to support this and get it through legislation here in Arizona. But if your listeners will look at that site, it's very plain to see that there are massive federal lands, federally managed lands in the western states, which belong to the states through their enabling acts. The enabling acts of the western states are no different than the enabling acts of the eastern states. It is up to the federal government to stand up to their promises and their commitments to the western states as they did to the eastern states, and turn the federal lands back to the states so that we can utilize them in a properly well-managed way to deal with the issues, to bring the tax dollars into our coffers so that we can get rid of the pilt, which we talked about earlier, and we can manage our own properties here in this state. The people, if please, listeners, the people who take best care of anything are the people who own it and have it close to them. The federal government has no idea what they're doing with these lands from a remote place in Washington, D.C., and they are deteriorating, and the resources of this country are devastated. There are trillions and trillions of dollars of natural resources here which do not have to be mined or received in a way that is brutal to the country or to the landscape, but are in a way that will profit and take care of the debt of this country if we open them up to the public and to the states so they can be utilized. So
Barry Weller, I appreciate that. And let me amplify one thing. Again, the enabling acts of the western states don't differ than what happened back east, but the promise was about a century ago that the federal government would eventually convey the lands back to the states or put them up for private sale. That has not happened in the West. You want to see that. Now, just one final question, Barry, before we let you go. You and I have both been involved in politics, and words mean something. When Harry Reid called some of his constituents, the folks out on the Bundy Ranch, domestic terrorists, what is your take on Harry Reid using that kind of language?
My take is that Harry Reid, and I cannot think for him, but I can't see any other reason to do or say those things other than to ratchet up the force of the federal government against the citizens. The people, just look at the videos, folks. There's plenty on YouTube and every other place. The mass majority of these people were unarmed. There was militia there who were trying to protect the borders and around the area, but never did they draw on the BLM. They were only there to protect the citizens who were unarmed and the horsemen who were unarmed.
Barry Weller, we'll have to leave it right there. We do appreciate your time checking in as the Vice Chairman of the Apache County Board of Supervisors out in Arizona.
That's a good update. Thanks so much for that, Mr. Weller. And that story will continue to update. And that's a real issue, JD, is getting those land rights back. Will that gain steam? We'll find out. We'll be back with more after this.
Brought to you